think, act, and prosper. You are now tuned into the Money Level Show.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Money Level Show, where we think, act, and prosper, and we talk all things macro and how that affects our money, how that affects us as the people, how it affects our rights, and all those different things. And so today we got a special guest coming back by the name of Doomberg. How you doing today?
Daryl, I'm doing great. Pleasure to be back and looking forward to another great discussion.
Yeah. I had I got a confession to make. I bought 7 chickens. So
how dare you? Yeah.
And then I believe on the last interview I talked about my neighbor's chickens. One day I went outside and I believe they had about 18.
Oh, you bought real chickens like that you're gonna collect eggs from and stuff.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought you meant like, at the grocery store.
No. We bought some real chickens, and
Wow.
yeah, so I mean, you're trending. A lot of people are wanting to stock up on chickens and eggs, and everything. So
Well, whatever it takes.
Yeah. So I mean, and just even on that note, kind of want to jump into like the food crisis situation. I've been talking a lot with my audience about that. We've went through quite a few videos about it, and the prices are just the charts are just looking crazy, just how they're just spiking straight up. And so I know you did the piece, the starvation diet. Was there anything new that you're starting to see, that any kind of trends that you're starting to see within this sector? Or is it just kind of like the same thing playing out with, Russia being a big exporter of fertilizer, and the different policies that affect the farming industry, as well as, Ukraine being the bread basket, and they're calling it the bread line now. Is that, something that you foresee just continuing to happen, or is things kind of, subsiding? Has anything changed?
Yeah.
Pretty much.
So I'm not sure when we were on last, but very recently we put out a piece called Farmers on the Brink. I'm not sure if you saw it, or if we discussed it last time, we may have. But in that piece, we laid out our research, which involved canvassing our contacts in the U.S. farming community predominantly, and a few folks overseas, to get a measure for what was really happening out in the field. And then we used that analysis to come to the conclusion that we're on the cusp of a real global famine. And here's how we think it's going to play out. All of the inputs into modern farming have been skyrocketing in price. And in the piece we discussed, fertilizers and herbicides and diesel and you name it. It's not only going up in price, but the supply is also getting much, much tighter. And we anticipate that in the U.S., obviously, farmers are going to pay that price. And if they lose too much money, the government will bail them out. And people on the lower end of our economic spectrum will get stimulus to cover the cost. We don't think there's going to be food shortages in the U.S. per se, at least not in the near term. But because we can and will pay any price, we are setting the global price for those same inputs at extremely high levels, such that less sophisticated farmers in the developing world won't be able to afford to use as much fertilizer, or even get their hands on, herbicides and fungicides and the diesel that makes the tractors run, or the parts that keeps the tractors going. And so what we're going to see is a real crisis of yield outside of the Western world, which is going to lead to diminished food production, which is going to lead to food riots, which we're starting to see already in some of the less fortunate parts of the world, or perhaps poorly managed countries, in the case of Sri Lanka. But we're seeing food riots in countries like Peru. We're seeing spiking costs of key food inputs. We're seeing the bizarre behavior of what's going on in China. We think this is all linked, and the beginning of a real crisis. And to the extent that U.S. farmers have the financial sophistication and the government support to insulate the country from the immediate impacts, the long-term consequences are pretty scary to contemplate.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely hear you on that. And I believe I read that article. And did you mention in that article about a farmer and a tractor piece
Yeah.
that they weren't able to get for like it was like a long time or something? They're still waiting for it or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. We quoted a farmer in, I had the piece in front of me, so it's not like I remember these pieces to that extent, but we quoted a farmer in Iowa who said he was waiting for a $40 emissions related sensor for his tractor and wasn't sure that he would get it anytime soon. This farmer was complaining to his Republican representative. And the direct quote was, "I cannot drive that tractor, a $250,000 piece of equipment, because I cannot get that sensor." And the point we were making in the piece was the chip shortage that is impacting the automotive sector, of course, is impacting every sector that uses chips, which for much of modern life is every sector. And so your washing machine has chips in it, your refrigerator, any sort of mechanical good that has electronic control embedded within it has chips in it, and that crisis that has started in auto has bled into the other supply chain verticals, and again, as I mentioned earlier, with the recent insanity going on in China, we don't expect much of this to get better anytime soon. So it's a pretty scary time. We ended that piece, Farmers on the Brink, with the sincere wish that we would be wrong. We're not pro-famine. We would rather be wrong than right in this case. But unfortunately, the data keeps rolling in. Just last week, we're seeing what we had predicted in Starvation Diet, which you mentioned at the top, which wrote all the way back last October. We predicted that countries would begin to limit exports in a senseless effort or a futile effort to minimize the impact on their home populations, which of course only leads to retaliatory export controls and economic vapor lock, as we described it in that piece. And it took a while for that prediction to start to play out. But just last week we saw Indonesia banning the export of palm oil, which is a critical cooking oil used by many people in Southeast Asia in particular. And that's going to have huge ramifications. And the piece we're writing for publication probably will be out before you publish this, but we're hoping to publish it later this week, tentatively called Diesel for Dinner. We're going to talk about the interconnections between energy and food, and how crazy it is, for example, that we are pushing renewable diesel in the U.S., which is driving up the price of soybeans in the time of unfolding global famine. And connecting these dots for our readers is a specialty of Doomberg. And so unfortunately for the world, fortunately for us, we have no shortage of interesting topics to cover.
Yeah. And along that same line, and there's a lot of countries coming out with these terms, grain security. I believe, Hungary was one of them. China's mentioned it. I think Argentina or something. I think it was Argentina or something. But I've been seeing that trend a lot with countries coming out and saying like, hey, we need to focus on grain security and pretty much the being able to feed their own population.
Yeah, so, and we're seeing that everywhere, and it especially now, of course, with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, it's only going to get worse. And as you mentioned, there's an awful lot of fertilizer that comes out of that area. Belarus produces something like 40% of the global potash supply. As a percentage of wheat exports, Ukraine and Russia are big players, and so especially now if we're going to delete sort of Russian energy from the global grid. You start to ponder some pretty hard outcomes for many unfortunate people.
Yeah, for sure. So we had the inflation numbers come out, and I mean, it pretty much, was 8.5%. And, I went through this with my audience, kind of looking at the CPI and the statistics and everything. And then we looked at shadow stats. What purpose do you feel like it serves the government to, obviously for them over historically, changing the algorithms or whatnot that calculate inflation. But we all know that it's higher than what it is. I mean, because I had a friend, recently go buy a brand new, or not a brand new, a used 2013 vehicle with 90,000 miles on it paid $24,000 for it.
Yeah. So the term you're referring to is called hedonic adjustments, and this is how the government takes the raw prices and tries their best to create an adjustment for technology progress. And the theory for why this needs to be done is I think sound. A television created today is better than a television created 10 years ago or 20 years ago. And in some markets like televisions, of course, the price of this has come down both raw as the functionality has increased. And so you can understand the difference between a modern vehicle with airbags and a great sound system and anti-lock brakes and all of the safety controls versus, a car made in the 70s. They're different. And so you have to try to estimate the inherent extra value that you get when you consider inflation. Having said that, there's no question that all of the adjustments that they have made tend to decrease the magnitude of inflation that they report. And the conspiracy goes that because the government entitlements are tied to that number, it's in the government's interest to minimize the growth of that number, even at the expense of their credibility. And so my response to such questions is 8.5% inflation is bad enough. Even if the numbers are true, that is a catastrophe for people. The median person in the U.S. who's living paycheck to paycheck and has no savings. The food inflation and energy inflation and inflation in housing, rent, these things are devastating and represent real and substantial decreases in their standard of living. And so whether inflation is 10% or 12% or 8.5%, these are distinctions without all that much difference because 8.5% is pretty bad enough.
Yeah, people aren't getting an 8.5% raise, every year.
Mm-hmm.
And so just being able to beat inflation is, it's almost, I wouldn't say impossible, but a lot of the jobs that are giving raises, they aren't giving 8.5%.
Yeah, and it's again, that's it's amazing. Sometimes you wonder whether our political leaders even read history. The history of inflationary impacts on society is well known, well understood. The causes are known, and yet we keep hurtling our way into repeating those same mistakes over and over. And I don't know what gets into people's heads when they think that somehow this will be different. It's not going to be different, and it's a big challenge.
Yeah, definitely. So with inflation, we're seeing these Shanghai lockdowns. So I've talked with my audience a few times, and I have some people that push back against me, about investing in Chinese equities. And I even told them this last time, even though, I may say these are cheap and, we can profit, blah, blah, blah. Like, I don't agree with what's going on over there. And we're seeing like these lockdowns, these disturbing videos. I've seen you retweet quite a few of them, and they're very disturbing. And we're starting to see like a huge port backlog of containers and container ships, and people waiting to offload their containers and all those things. Do you believe like inflation is going to get worse? Because it's almost like the Suez Canal, but it seems like worse than that.
Yeah, so we have many friends in China and a fair bit of experience in country. We wouldn't characterize ourselves as geopolitical experts generally, or experts in China in particular, but we know a fair bit, and we have some sources, and we were pretty early on highlighting, at least on Twitter, we've not yet written about it, the bizarre nature of what was occurring in Shanghai and the crisis that is being created, which seems almost artificial. Put out a tweet just yesterday that these videos have the same kind of feel for the videos we were seeing in early 2020 of people collapsing in the streets of China, which sort of, I think, fed into a lot of the fear around, and led to the lockdowns and things that we saw over here. It's a very bizarre thing, Daryl. I wish I had an intelligent answer to explain what their strategy is, but they are as you said, destroying their economy and punishing their citizens in a way that is almost unimaginable. And some of the videos are disturbing, so disturbing that you wonder whether they're just propaganda, and why it would be that these videos would be allowed to escape China and get onto our social media, which is why we haven't really tweeted too many of the videos, because it feels, something about it doesn't feel right. But we do have friends in Shanghai, and I could tell you that much of the reporting is accurate. I mean, there's a struggle for food. The city is locked down. You can be randomly tossed into a medical camp even if you get like a false positive. One positive test means they're welding doors closed of large apartment buildings. It's really horrific, and a terrible tragedy. And the transmission function of how that behavior will impact us is delayed, in the sense that, yes, the ports are tied up, but the real consequences of that won't be felt here for at least a few months, but they will be felt here. And we were pondering just this morning in the office, like, how can the global economy simultaneously lose Russian energy and Chinese manufacturing, and we expect that things are going to be okay? They're not going to be okay. It's just a matter of degree and timing. So we shall see. We're watching as closely as one can from over here. We noted a couple of days ago on Twitter that we've never seen so many professional Chinese citizens openly complaining on social media, which is not something you see. It's very rare. If you've made it to, a professional job in a global company, which would be the sort of overlap of our friends, which is how we met them through our corporate careers. You almost would never see them criticizing the party or criticizing government response to anything. And we are observing that in volume, and we are also simultaneously seeing how quick the censors are deleting those posts. And so something has changed in China. It's a very precarious situation. We can't claim to know or to be able to predict the outcomes. We just know that this is a serious, potentially earth-shattering event that's transpiring here. So,
yeah, and I was looking at how Shanghai is actually a huge exporter and a huge port for containers and such. And so, we were looking through that in one of the recent videos. So just transition a little bit. You did a recent article on water supply, especially in the Southwest area of the United States. And this kind of piqued my interest because I had Rick Rule on last year, and he mentioned investing in water. And I didn't really think of anything much about it since then, or like kind of research it. And then I saw your article come out about the actual, the water coming from that one river or whatnot within that area, and how it has to be shared versus like the Mississippi River, which flows into a lot of different places. I mean, I'm in Washington State, so we have a lot of water up here. So what are you seeing in terms of that? And I believe there's something happening on the global scale with water as well. And so I'm just trying to wrap my head around what's happening with clean drinking water that people can consume.
Yeah, so the piece it was one of my favorite titles. We pride ourselves on good titles. This one was called "Buy Me a River," and we tell the story of the Colorado River, which is the most important water artery in the American Southwest. And it's a pretty well-known story, but we told it in a slightly different way, which is we tried to frame the trade-offs and the decisions that we're making as it pertains to the Colorado River. So the real core issue with the Colorado is there's too much demand on its water than there is fresh water to go around. And it's managed through this series of archaic agreements and old laws called the law, collectively known as the Law of the River. And in the piece, we talk about how the two biggest dams on the river, the Glen Canyon Dam and the Hoover Dam, which most of your listeners would probably be most familiar with, the water levels in the lakes that feed those dams are shrinking to sort of crisis levels. And the reason why it's a crisis in the near term, potentially, is because if the water levels get too low, they can't run those hydropower plants, which is the whole reason to build those dams in the first place, in addition to flood control. And so we sort of tried to frame the trade-offs here because, we did a calculation, which is the total power produced by both of these dams is combined only half as much power as the last remaining nuclear power plant in California produces on an annual basis. And so you could pretty easily replace the electricity produced by these dams with smart and small and distributed nuclear power. But replacing the water needs, which are used for irrigation and drinking, is a lot more challenging. And we talked about desalination technologies, and then really ended the piece with a look into the biggest beneficiary of the Colorado River, which is the Imperial Valley in California, which gets more than 20% of all of the water, and they've turned the desert into this oasis of farmland. And one wonders what power resides behind such decisions, and whether this is truly the best use of the Colorado River. But it is what it is, and it's a fascinating insight into the choices between water and energy and food and life, which is sort of the perfect frame for us to build that concept around.
Yeah, and I read a lot of your articles, and I'm glad they're short because like now I'm seeing like I need to go read this again. I need to read it multiple times. Just to wrap my head around some of the concepts. I recently just read the other one about the underwater cables and such. And so, I encourage everyone to go subscribe to Doomberg and check out these articles. These articles are very enlightening. They give a lot of in-depth information just about what's happening. And they're short enough where you can read them multiple times, and really get a good grasp on them.
Imagine how long it takes to write them.
I bet. So there's a lot of talk about recession, depression, and I guess some people are debating this or whatever. I mean, we're always finding something to debate, whether it's gold, Bitcoin, whatever it may be, but inflation, deflation. We're looking at. I know that we're looking at a potential. Well, I guess I would say highly potential, highly possible, or probable situation where we're going to have some economic turmoil. I see liquidity drying up, the Fed's coming out being hawkish about tightening, government still overspending. They're still $1 trillion in the deficit for their budget, and I don't know where the bond buyers are. As far as when the Fed stopped buying bonds, who are actually buying those right now. And I don't know how much the banks can actually consume of those. And so what is your outlook as far as like a recession, depression this year, next year, or whatnot?
Yeah, so I think ultimately the inability to produce the energy needed to power society means that it's very difficult to grow. And we had posted a chart on Twitter a while ago, which sort of covered the last time oil spiked over $100 a barrel, and that was in the months before the last global financial crisis. And our point is that these two things are pretty connected. And if you short the world of energy, you're going to short the economy of growth. It's just inevitable because all growth ultimately derives from the foundation of energy that we produce. To your specific question about the Fed and bond buying, I think this is related and a great example of how energy can be used as a framework to explain what's going on. So the largest buyer of treasuries today is Japan. And Japan concurrently is a huge importer of energy. And so because it depends on the rest of the world to buy its energy, it has a trade imbalance now as energy continues to go higher in price, which means the Japanese yen has been weakening, which means the largest buyer of treasuries can afford to buy less. And so what we're seeing is a very tight correlation between the Japanese yen weakening and US interest rates rising, because if the buyer of bonds can afford less, then the interest rates have to go up. That's sort of inverse relationship between the bonds and the interest rates that they pay. And so the transmission function of the energy crisis to US Fed Reserve policy is right there and easy to see. And in fact, we put a couple of tweets out this morning. The Russian ruble has strengthened to even better than it was before the war, while the Japanese yen weakens. One of those countries is a huge producer of energy, and the other is an importer. And so it all sort of wraps together pretty nicely. We're putting together a presentation for our Doomberg Pro subscribers in early May that sort of gives a grand unified theory of all this and how energy and life and currencies are all sort of intertwined, and economic growth is a function of the energy that you are allowed to waste. And it's tough for people to wrap their brains around that, but ultimately the human endeavor is about improving your standard of living, and the only way to improve your standard of living is to impose order on your local environment, and the only way to do that is to create waste heat. And so ultimately, the richer you are, the more energy you get to waste. And that's simply true. It's sort of an axiom of life. And if you simultaneously destroy our ability to produce cheap and abundant electricity, and then mess around with the supply chains like we're seeing in China, it's pretty hard to see how economic growth is the product of that toxic brew.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I've also been like processing a career shift in my job, currently. And I just been thinking about like all this stuff that's going on. I'm like, do I need to be somewhere more stable right now, or should I take this risk or what, and so, yeah, that's definitely been challenging.
It is for sure. And, we've been through those journeys ourselves, and luckily for us, we found our passion in life, which is writing these articles, and we found our audience. And so we feel a little buffered from the economic crisis, to the extent that as long as we keep delighting our readers and our subscribers, then we should be okay. I guess, since we've last appeared, I should say, just we've converted ourselves to a paid newsletter. We're still going to be free for the rest of April, but come May 1st, the old articles and the ones we've referenced here will be available for free, but all the new articles will be going behind a paywall. And that's been a focus of a lot of our effort this month. And we're very grateful for all of the people who have decided to sign up, and hopefully some of your listeners will too.
Yeah, and it's pretty cheap. It's about $40 a month, something like that.
$30 a month for all of the articles, but if you pay annual, the price goes down to $25.
Okay.
And then we have a pro tier that's more expensive. That is geared towards sort of high net worth and family office type investors who get a little more access to the Doomberg team and a lot more background on our research to help for their investing process.
Hopefully not the Nancy Pelosi's of the world.
If she subscribes, we'd hope to delight her.
All right. Thanks, Doomberg. Appreciate you for coming on and everything. And everyone, be sure to go subscribe to Doomberg. Follow Doomberg on Twitter. Your Twitter following is actually grown a whole lot. It's 70,000, something like that?
Yeah, I think we're at 76 as of this morning. It's been great. We do create a lot of content original for Twitter, and we sort of view Twitter as our remaining free product once we go behind the paywall. And if we can entice people with our insights on Twitter, maybe they can be convinced to cross the bridge and join the chicken coop directly for the low price of $25 a month, as we discussed.
Yeah, because I believe you came on in February, and I think you were at 30,000 during that time.
Yeah, we've been growing about 30% per month. It's pretty crazy. And we thought, maybe as we got bigger, that would slow down. But it's the old adage is sort of true. If you create value, then people will quote pay you. And here, the payment of a Twitter follow is free to people. And so our objective is to create overwhelming value vis-a-vis that cost. Same with our articles. We've had some people complain about the price of Doomberg or the fact that we're going to a paid subscriber model, but in reality, if we're creating more value than that for people, if something is not worth paying for, then it's worthless to you, and that's fine. Like, we understand that the vast majority of people don't pay for content, but for the people who do find our work valuable, they kind of identify themselves by becoming subscribers, and then we are all the more motivated to delight and please them, because now they have voted a confidence vote in our favor by expressing to us that our work is valuable to them. And that's a really great feeling, but also a real accomplishment for us because it allows us to do what we love all day and still be able to make a living, which is the most thrilling part of this whole project. So I appreciate the opportunity to come back on and, really enjoy our conversations and happy to make it a regular thing.
Yeah, for sure. And everyone out there, you can sacrifice, 10 energy drinks a month to be able to subscribe to Doomberg and be able to consume some of this good content. And so we appreciate for the value that you're delivering to the community and your care and concern for people, even though you're Doomberg, like you're actually doing out of the heart of like caring for people, and our well-being.
Indeed. Appreciate it.
All right. Thank you.